Hello, dear friends, and welcome to part 3 of this whispered read-through of the 70 great mysteries of the ancient world, unlocking the secrets of past civilizations. This is a wonderful book, presented in a really engaging format, I think, taking us through myths and legends of civilization and exploring the potential archaeological or historical facts behind them. We start part 3 at number 11, the Star of Bethlehem. We have the quote here from Matthew. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. So this, of course, would have happened around 8 to 4 BC, and in the location of Israel. And apparently few ancient mysteries are as controversial as the Star of Bethlehem, because according to Christian beliefs, the description of the star in the Gospel of Matthew is brief. It's a star in the east, directed by Magi to find the Messiah in Judea. Then some researchers believe that there wasn't really a star, so the story might have just been a myth meant to convey that Jesus had a messianic birth, but some believe there's a historical basis. So determining first of all what may have drawn the Magi to Judea is difficult. No one knows the date of Jesus' birth, because of course biblical scholars will say that it's the 25th of December wasn't Jesus' birthday, but it was a Roman holiday for the unconquerable sun, which Christians adopted sometime around AD 354. So, searching in and around this time frame for this star, researchers have proposed several celestial objects, comets called long-haired stars in ancient times, were plausible, because apparently the star went before and then stood over the infant Jesus. A comet does move slowly between the stars, which could explain its motion. However, the comet's appearance was an omen of a king's death, not birth. The account in Matthew says that Herod and the people of Jerusalem didn't notice the star, so it wasn't visibly noteworthy. And the evidence argues against a nova because the appearance of a new star would have been seen by everyone. There's a Chinese record of a nova in 5 BC, but there were no Western astrological records claiming that any new star meant a king's birth. Here we have a Savarogo with God says this Roman catacomb tablet showing the Magi offering gifts to the ancient Jesus. To the infant Jesus, not ancient Jesus. I suppose he is ancient now, but here we have the 3 wise men from the east, guided by the Star of Bethlehem, from a mosaic in Italy, 6th century. We have here on the right the Florentine painter Giotto di Bondone, not aware of a comet's foreboding message when he painted the Adoration of the Magi. He might have been inspired by the bright comet of 1304 as he worked on this fresco. We have here on the left ancient world comets considering an omen of the death of a king. Augustus Caesar claimed the ominous comet of 44 BC as the wandering soul of the assassinated Julius Caesar. And here is a coin showing Ares the ram gazing backwards at a star. The inscription reads, "Of the people of the metropolis of Antioch." So most theories propose conspicuous planetary conjunctions. There were countless close passages of planets around the time of Jesus' birth, but visibly striking planetary groupings didn't necessarily point to a king's birth, and most astrological conditions for royal births, like Roman emperors, were unimpressive by modern standards. So a clue came from a Roman coin here. A new perspective about the star's astrological nature came unexpectedly from a Roman coin issued in Antioch close to the time of Jesus' birth. It's a bronze coin with the ram, telling us how Ares controls human activity in Judea, Samaria, Idumea, and Palestine, Coal, Syria, all of which are in King Herod's realm. So it could commemorate the AD 6th incorporation of Judea into Roman Syria, where Antioch was the capital city. So the star above the ram fate under Roman Antioch's control. But the coin's importance lies in showing that astrologers would have watched Aries the ram for a royal birth in Judea. So not only do the astrological sources tell us where astrologers watched for a new king of the Jews, but they also explained which star announced the king's birth, and that regal star was Star of Zeus, the planet Jupiter. So the optimum time for Jupiter to confer kingships was when the planet was rising as a morning star, which is what in the East means in astrological terms. Examining the likely time frame of this birth reveals a unique and extraordinary day. On the 17th of April, 6 BC, Jupiter emerged in the east in Aries the ram. The moon was also in Aries, moving directly towards Jupiter for a close encounter. So that revealed that the moon passed before Jupiter, so moreover the sun was in Aries, where it was exalted. Even Saturn was present, which created an incredible omen for the birth of a great king in Judea. The astrologer Firmicus Maternus in AD 334 cited these same conditions in Aries as marking the birth of a divine and immortal person, which is excellent evidence that this inspired the Magi to go to Judea. And then Jupiter also did something else. It returned to Aries, where it became stationary for several days. Modern astronomers refer to Matthew's description as a retrograde motion, an optical illusion produced by the Earth passing Jupiter in the solar system. And the stationing of Jupiter in Aries was another indicator pointing to great events in Judea, which would have made the Magi rejoice, believing they would indeed find the new king in Bethlehem. So there's no proof outside the biblical account that the Magi or anyone else verified Jesus' birthday, but early Christians believed that he was born under a royal star, which furthered the messianic prophecy. In any case, people will have to draw their own conclusions whether he was born under this star in the east. We now have here the King Arthur and the Holy Grail legend, number 12, happening around 400 to 600 in Britain. Winston Churchill here saying, if we could see exactly what happened, we should find ourselves in the presence of a theme as well founded, as inspired, and as inalienable from the inheritance of mankind as the Odyssey or the Old Testament. It is all true, or it ought to be, and more and better besides. So are these legends true? Many Arthurian enthusiasts are not really comfortable with Churchill's deflecting aphorism quoted above. We ought to be able to prove Arthur's existence, they believe, given current knowledge of the historical and archaeological evidence, but it's narrowing of the question. The truth to the mystery of Arthur is informed by history and archaeology, but also by mythology, folklore, literary criticism, and other disciplines. So a historical Arthur does remain a possibility, but good evidence is lacking. The first written accounts of his deeds, the sparse Annales Cambriae, the Welsh Annals, and the fabulous Historia Britanniae, produced in the 8th and 9th centuries AD, some 300 years after the date given for his death, which was 537. There's a casual reference to Arthur in the Welsh bardic poem Y Gododin, which may be older, but it didn't appear in written form until the 13th century. There's simply no primary source evidence for Arthur's existence. Gildas, a fellow Briton writing in the earliest 6th century, doesn't mention Arthur, nor does Bede, writing his famous history 2 centuries later. Without contemporary records, historians haven't been able to make a very strong case for Arthur. So in 1911, monks at Glastonbury Abbey excavated their ancient cemetery and uncovered a remarkable grave. Inside it was a hollowed-out long coffin, the bones of a large man, and those of a woman whose golden hair was still intact. An overturned lead cross near the grave bore the Latin inscription, Hic iacet sepultus inclitus rex Arturius in insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the famous King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. Had this excavation been without controversy, there wouldn't be much of a mystery about Arthur and Avalon, but the monks knew what they were looking for, because a bard had allegedly tipped off their patron, King Henry II, and finding Arthur's bones was guaranteed to bring in revenues from pilgrimage to help pay for rebuilding the abbey. A little bit of shenanigans by the sound of it. It's the book that made Arthur famous throughout Europe, Geoffrey Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. Britain in 1136 was by then being roundly which Arthur allegedly lived. So many accused the monks of having pulled off a brilliant hoax. Devious or not, they were the first to look for material evidence for clues to his existence, and the search for Camelot fascinated early antiquarians who recorded Arthurian associations with sites like South Canterbury. But with the development of modern archaeology in the 20th century, new and compelling evidence concerning the age of Arthur began to emerge. So the first discovery was at Tintagel in Cornwall, the site of Arthur's birth in Geoffrey's history. I've been there. There's a lot of tourist trappings to Land's End and Arthurian legend. This is the rocky promontory called Tintagel Island in Cornwall. And there is a university team, Glasgow University team, excavating Site C at Tintagel. So there was excavations and that revealed Norman castle, as well as several small buildings of stone and slate, with pottery shards as well. So these were in the main unremarkable, but the shards were remains of fine tablewares and amphoras, likely wine and oil containers imported from North Africa. Radford interpreted Tintagel as a Celtic monastery whose monks were engaged in active commerce with the Mediterranean world more than a century after Britain ceased to be a province of the Roman Empire. And scholars prefer to see Tintagel as the base of a powerful chieftain who used it to receive tribute and distribute gifts to his retainers. Was that Arthur? The excavations at Tintagel unearthed several more small buildings and covering a drainage ditch, one highly publicised and inscribed slate bearing the word Ardognov, which represents the Welsh name Arthnow. That's the slate bearing that word, found in 1998. And below here is the Winchester round table, a massive oak tabletop created in the 13th or 14th century, painted early in the reign of Henry VIII. Arthur bears a likeness to the Tudor king. Another excavation drew much attention was Leslie Alcock's work at South Canterbury in the late 60s. It was locally known as Camelot. Alcock excavated a prominent Iron Age hill fort that yielded occupational evidence from the Neolithic to the late Saxon period, and in the Arthurian period, the 5th and 6th century, the hill fort was greatly refortified, new structures built on the enclosed plateau, including a large feasting hall. Lots of pottery and things you'd expect. But like the legends of Merlin and Tristan and Isolde, that of the Holy Grail may have been an independent tradition later attached to the Arthurian legends. So when the Grail first appears in the French poem Percival, it's an ornate dish which serves the mass wafer in the castle of the main Fisher King. And because the poem was left unfinished, subsequent authors were given the freedom to depict the Grail in myriad forms. Some do it as a pre-Christian Celtic adventure of magical cauldrons, but most popular has always been the tradition identifying it with the chalice of the Last Supper. So, according to a medieval apocrypha, it passed into the possession of Joseph of Arimathea, whose family brought it to Britain during the founding of the island's first Christian community at Glastonbury. So the Glastonbury monks, of course, played their part in the shaping of that legend, but archaeologists have been curious as to whether there is anything in it. So the abbey was excavated by Raleigh Radford in the late 1950s, and found beneath later Saxon structures slight remains of early wattle buildings, which were a founder's church and monastic oratories, and then an ancient cemetery. So proof that the monks had indeed dug where they said and had uncovered early burials. And then, despite the flurry of archaeological activity, nothing really has been found that explicitly identified a historical Arthur, and at the same time, a veritable industry of Arthur books has taken off. So they're detective-like tales positing candidates for the Arthur, which includes the 2nd century Roman general Lucius Artorius Castus, the Breton warlord Riothamus, and an obscure Welsh king of Gwynedd, and one Arthur, son of the Scottish king Aidan mac Garel. Of course, local tourist boards watch with interest to see whether Arthur will be declared a Cornishman, a Welshman, or a Scot. The quest to possess a piece of Arthur isn't anything new. Richard the Lionheart gave to a crusading companion, a sword alleged to be Excalibur. Henry VIII showed Emperor Charles V the real round table hanging at Winchester Castle. They bore a likeness of him, and both English and Welsh princes 1390 perhaps, in Turin in Italy. And when the Lord had given the linen cloth to the servant of the priest, he went to James and appeared to him. So here we have a gold coin of Justinian II struck between 692 and 695 in Constantinople. They were the first to have an image of Jesus, very close to that on the shroud, and a 6th century AD icon of Jesus from St. Catherine's Monastery, Mount Sinai. And here's a negative of the first photograph of the shroud taken in 1898. So the Shroud of Turin is a large linen cloth, about 14 foot 3 inches long, by 3 foot 7 inches wide, and it bears the image front and back of a man who apparently died by crucifixion. So that would alone excite interest, but the claim is that it's the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ. The claim has provoked detailed examination at international conferences. So in 1978, an exhibition of the Shroud of Turin in Italy attracted 3 million people, numbers no doubt to be greater in future exhibitions. Some think that the history of the shroud began in 1357 when Geoffrey II of Charny exhibited it in Liry, France, yet earlier mentions of images of Jesus are known. So the 4th century one source relates that Thaddeus or Ade painted an image of Jesus with choice pigments at Edessa in Syria. The 6th century another source narrates a towel where Christ wiped his face on a towel and thereby imprinted his image on it. Christ then gave the towel to an emissary from King Akbar of Edessa. Stories of an image of Christ at Edessa persisted until AD 944, when the Byzantine army moved the image to Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. The image rested until AD 1204, when the Knights of the Fourth Crusade sacked the city and took its treasures, including the image, which could explain how it got to France, to be shown in the 14th century. So many burial cloths of Jesus were exhibited in the Middle Ages, so what makes this one interesting? So when you view it, the image on the shroud is a rather muted, yellowish likeness against a white background. Here it is, where the 2 vertical lines are burn marks and the triangular patches the result of a fire in 1532. And there is the enlargement of the shroud showing the linen weave and blood stains and serum stains here. And here is the 3D depiction of the shroud by an image analyzer showing a full frontal view. You can see the face there. So, if you look at it as a negative image, it's best understood as a negative image of a crucified man, front and back. Strangely, it's also got 3-dimensional information. There's an amazing amount of detail in the image. The human anatomy is depicted with great accuracy, including lesions from scourging, blood flows from the nail wounds in the wrist and the feet, blood on the scalp, details of the hair and beard, and actually additional observers point out a possibly broken nose and even coins on the eyes. So the bloodstains have undergone DNA testing and they are human from a male type AB. There's also microscopic debris, including specks of dust, dirt and pollen, and the plant pollen comes from numerous plants, with experts claiming to have identified 19 species of plants that grow only in the vicinity of Jerusalem and Jericho. The plot thickens. In 1988, radiocarbon dating tests of the shroud were undertaken, using accelerated mass spectrometry technique, which allows smaller samples to be radiocarbon dated. So a tiny piece of cloth that dated the shroud to 1260 to 1390. Does that not settle the question of its age? So for many, especially in the press, that radiocarbon test did just that. And the 1988 results were conclusive, yet others pointed out that the sample was taken from a part of the shroud that had been touched and contaminated by human hands, most since it was first exhibited. Furthermore, it was scorched in a fire, and fire introduced its new contaminants. The fire happened in 1532, and fungi and bacteria grow on ancient linen fibres and resist removal by the dating process used for the shroud. And since the radiocarbon dates the 13th or 14th century, the artistic style of the image, if it is a fraud, should be medieval, but it isn't. There's an experiment to try and reproduce the shroud image in 1999 using a cloth to which myrrh and aloe have been applied. So how do people explain it? Some people have said that it's just been made from painting. Others have suggested it's a scorch from draping a hot statue. But others have maintained that the imprint is a kind of vaporgraph, which gas is given off from a decomposing human body leave an imprint. Some have sought to prove that. And there are those who have made a case of radiation theories, the body's natural electromagnetic field interacting with cloth. And some have argued that that's a supernatural burst of electromagnetic radiation for the resurrection of Jesus. So what are we left with in attempting to explain it? Does it really testify to a miracle? Obviously there's still room for argument and experiment. But some of the most convincing theories are that the imprint is the result of a complex and natural, subtle processes that we don't fully understand. Experiments with a medical mannequin in an ancient tomb in Jerusalem suggest that the heat from post-mortem fever and human sweat, which supplies an acid, combined with the alkaline high-humidity environment of a tomb cut into limestone rock, will produce a subtle image on unbleached linen. But whatever the process might have been, it remains a genuine scientific anomaly and resists our best attempt at analysis and classification. Very interesting topic. I think I saw once that there was also a theory that Leonardo da Vinci may have just painted it, which would cause a bit of a genius. I mean, he was a genius, but an extreme genius. Well, this has been busted, of course, based on when we're reading it, the Mayan myth of Will the World End in 2012, number 14. We are luckily all still alive, present and accounted for, enjoying this video today, so we're thankful for that not coming to pass. But it could have been written in the 250 to 909 AD period in Central America. Here's a quote. Again, there comes a humiliation, destruction and demolition. There came a rain of resin from the sky. There came the one named gouger of faces. He gouged out their eyeballs. There came sudden bloodletting. He snapped off their heads. How cheery. How cheery. We have a painted vase showing the cigar-smoking lord of the underworld, god El, as he presides over an important ritual at the dawn of the last creation. Come December 2012, apparently the current race of humans is due to be wiped from the face of the earth in a fearful cataclysm, which is, I think, is the subject of the film 2012. So we got a movie, but not the reality, which is good. The ancient Mayan calendar, give or take a day or so, the 23rd of the fateful month of December, will mark the end of 13 baktons of the long count cycle, completing a journey of 1,872,000 days that began with the last such event in 3114 BC. The Maya, the most sophisticated and literate of Central America's ancient civilizations, believed in a cyclical universe that had continuing creations and annihilations. It describes how the created gods tried to populate it with humankind, and their first attempt produces the animals of the earth, but they can't speak and praise their makers. They're banished to the forest as failures. Oh dear. Poor tigers and gorillas. In the second, people are formed from clay, but they jabber insensibly and their bodies start to crumble. Some of them are still around to this day, aren't they, surely? The gods break them up in disgust, and for the third creation, humans are formed from wood, have no souls, and forget their creators. So to destroy them, they not only produce the aforementioned flood, fire, and demons, they even make their cooking utensils rise up against them, crushing their faces with stones. Finally, the gods try maize dough as the stuff of life, and the people of today came into being. So we're all made from maize. There we go. That's really interesting. I love that. So no one knows exactly when or where the long count system was invented, but the contemporary date falls only in 32 BC. The long count dates are written in a 5-place notation, mostly working in a base of 20, unlike our own base 10. The high value is normally the Baktuna unit of 144,000 days, but we know there are 19 higher ones rarely expressed, all set with a coefficient of 13. This is highly mathematical. Here's a monolith at the city of Curica called Stella C, which contains the best description of the creation events of 3114 BC. And here we have the scene from the Dresden Codex, a late hieroglyphic book showing the destruction of the earth by flood. So advances in deciphering the script gave some insights into the events of the last 13 Bakhtun date in 3114 creation and ordering of gods becoming a central hearth and the parting of stones. This wasn't the true year zero, so the inscriptions also tell of mythic episodes long before 3114 BC. They similarly calculated dates well into the future. So there is a royal anniversary projected forward to AD 4772. Wow, there can thus be no sense in which 2012 represents the end of time. So only one inscription found at the site of Tortuguero prophetically describes the ending of 13 Bactans in 2012, but it's too damaged and only partially legible. It does refer to Bolonocte, the name of a well-known Mayan god, and prefixed with the term Yem, descending, rather reminiscent of the image of the diving god that becomes so popular in Mayan art of the post-classic era, 909 to 1697. And as we know, the long count didn't survive to see more than a fraction of its vast vision unfold. The last proper date was carved at Tanina in Mexico in 909. That previous century had seen a social, ecological and demographic crisis sweep the region, bringing the classic civilization to an end. But that disaster pales when compared to the events of the 16th century. Of course, Europeans were a death sentence for untold numbers of Maya, because the native people of the Americans were decimated by disease and new religion imposed on pain of torture and execution. And traditional learning was all but eradicated, so here was a catastrophe worthy of ancient prophecy. I didn't realise it stretched right into the 4000s, so I wonder what royal will be celebrated then. Here we have number 15, Aztlan and the myth of the Aztec migration, which has been the 13th and 15th centuries BC in the Valley of Mexico. Here's Fray Diego Duran in the 16th century telling us these people, like the others who populated the country, departed from the seven caves in a land where they had lived called Aztlan. This name means whiteness or place of the herons. Here we have pages in the Codex Puturini depicting the Aztec migration from Aztlan, an island in the middle of a lake. There's the defeated Coyolxauhqui, the sculpture found at the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and the sign which led the Aztecs to found their capital city, and an eagle perched on a cactus on a rock here from the Codex Mendoza. So the Aztecs and their allies created an empire in central and southern Mexico during the 15th and early 16th centuries AD, barely 100 years before they were overcome by the Spanish expedition of Hernán Cortés. In the national myth of Mexico today, they're idolized in the popular imagination, the heroic indigenous past, and the tragedy of foreign conquest. So where did the Aztecs actually come from? The early colonial annals and pictorial manuscripts prepared from Aztec sources, as well as archaeological excavations, trace them to the early 13th century in the Valley of Mexico with historical certainty. The ultimate geographical place of their origins remains an unsolved mystery. They appeared as one of several tribes of nomadic hunter-gatherers and part-time farmers, who in the 13th century were migrating into central highland Mexico from the northern deserts. Myths and legends tell of Aztlan, a place of cranes, and an origin place far to the north. It's described as an island hill rising from a lake. And there the Aztecs emerged from caves in the earth womb in the time of creation. Then they decided to leave by canoes to their mainland. And they were joined by another group, the Moon people, the Mexica, hence the compound name Mexica Aztecs, by which they're often known. And they were led by a chieftain, Hummingbird on the left, who appears thereafter as a secret effigy, transported by priests. So the magical birth of the chief had taken place before the migration, which tells of an aged priestess, Coatlicue, who was sweeping an earth shrine atop Coatzacoalco, the serpent mountain, and unexpectedly a ball of feathers fell from the sky and impregnated her. It's unfortunate. When her sons, the 400, and her elder daughter, learned of the pregnancy, they were enraged and determined to slay her. They advanced up the mountain, and then suddenly the chief was born as a fearsome, supernatural, powerful warrior, hurling a flame serpent. He pierced the daughter and cut off her head, sending her body crashing in pieces down the mountain. And then the people scattered, and the chief chased them without mercy. So continuing the migration, their tribe moved from place to place, sometimes stopping for years, and at one location a dissident faction split off. They also paused at a mountain the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they attempted to settle near the springs of Chapultepec. There another fabled battle took place when the chief slew the enemy chieftain and had his heart thrown into the lakeshore marshes. And the heart landed at the place where the wandering tribe would later found their great pyramid and capital, Tenochtitlan, which is described as a field of reeds with magically white juniper, cattails and willows. Finally, the Aztecs saw an eagle perched on a cactus growing out of a rocky outcrop, a long-sought vision prophetized by the chief as a mystical sign of the place where the tribe was to settle. So, what are we to make of these mythic events? The early years of the Aztecs in the Valley of Mexico present a different picture because they were despised as barbarians with no aristocratic ruling lineage, and they suffered humiliating rebuffs and defeats from the older urban communities. The tribe was forced to flee into reed beds, but they proved resilient and enterprising, and by 1428 had assimilated an urban way of life and formed alliances. They shifted the balance of power to embark on conquests to make the city of Tenochtitlan the most feared and richest city in Mexico. So the ruler, it's good, soon saw the need to define a new historical identity, and a council assembled to review the obscure origins and the existing tribal migration accounts, the humiliations endured and the lack of prestigious ancestry. All of this was unacceptable for imperial status. So scholars analysing official texts note that the story beginning in Aztlan conforms to a pattern of migration stories distributed south into Guatemala, in central Mexico, in Michoacan to the northwest, and northwards to New Mexico. It always begins in a faraway land or a lake to the north, and often people emerge from the earth or the waters. There's a supernatural leader and a messenger that points to the route of migration. So thus the official migration story was established based on models that were already recognised and conceived by the Aztecs themselves in a mythical place rather than a specific geographical location, which is why modern attempts to locate it have ended in speculation. The fearless birth of the chief and the slaying of his enemies may be seen as an Aztec myth to bypass their lack of a legitimate aristocratic ancestral lineage. The fact remains that in ancient Mexico there was a pattern of intermittent connections from at least the first millennium BC between urban peoples of the central highland basins and the tribes of the arid north. It's quite probable that the Aztecs were